Well, good afternoon to you. It is 4:06 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Sarah Bedford joins us at 4:30. We'll get an update from her on the people who've been working on the Biden family investigation inside of David Weiss's office in Delaware. It turns out they're very cozy with the Bidens. Shocked face. Manny Diaz will be with us at 5 o'clock. He runs the education department there in the state of Florida and is fighting back against all of the lies the White House has been telling this past week about the curriculum going on down in that state. And we'll chat with him about it. And we'll have you join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Concerns about the integrity of our election system continue despite the media's best efforts to say you're not allowed to be concerned at all about election integrity. And my next guest is obviously very focused on that subject for a living. He is Ken Cuccinelli. He's the national chairman of the Election Transparency Initiative, and he joins us now. Ken, great to talk to you again, sir.
Always a pleasure.
Give us, if you will, an update on election integrity efforts going on across the country right now. I know that a lot of states have passed laws to make their elections more obviously secure. Will that be helpful coming up in 2024?
Yeah, absolutely. We are much better off today than we were in 24. We took a major step backwards in Michigan with a referendum that was basically it had a lot of the features of the Democrats' terrible H.R. 1 bill that you and I have talked about on your show.
Yeah.
That was defeated in 21 and 22. But other than that step back, we've made progress in Florida, Georgia, Arizona, Iowa, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, even Virginia, and on a bipartisan basis, getting rid of Zuckerbucks. There's more to do there. But so a lot of progress has been made. We are a lot better off than we were heading into the 2020 election. I would also note, I'm not a huge cheerleader of the Republican National Committee, but they are now in a posture of litigating substantially more than they used to. Now, they were forbidden by a court order from doing a lot of it before, but that's gone now. And so they're engaged, and that's very important because the parties have standing to litigate that individual voters often don't have. Mm-hmm. So things are a lot better now than they were. We have a lot farther to go, but if you measure it against 2020, no question about it, we're far better off in many swing states.
A lot of the court cases that occurred after the 2020 election involved judges basically barking at Republican attorneys that you should have litigated this before. You can't do it after the election. Yes. As you assess the kind of the landscape now, you've kind of hinted at it just a moment ago, but do you think that the army of lawyers that are necessary for these elections are in place now?
So the left has built this process effort to change how elections are run, including litigating the hell out of them for 19 years, all the way back to 2004 with George Soros money and so forth. We just started really 3 years ago. So we have not caught up, but we have substantially closed the gap. We're much less of an underdog in those kinds of fights now than we used to be. And we are on the front foot in many parts of the country in bringing these things beforehand, because once a bad ballot goes into the ballot box, it's pretty tough to get out. It really is impossible to get out. The only choice at that point is to ask a judge to throw the election out. And think about that. If you're a judge, I mean, just as a human being, that's a lot to ask somebody to do after you have gone through an election.
Well, sure, especially after the 2020 election, the immense kind of professional and social pressures that are on these judges to just let the election go and not call it into question must be very difficult to overcome. I don't think anybody wants to admit that, but that's definitely happening.
All the way up to the Supreme Court. I mean, Justice Thomas called out the court on this, says, look, we can't just declare all these things moot and never give anyone guidance. So he was, tongue lashing. By the way, the same court that overturned Roe was refusing to hear any of these cases substantively, and Thomas was calling them out on it. And So hopefully the courts are learning a lesson about dealing with this on the front side. Certainly the whole right of center world, including Republicans, but not exclusively, have learned how important it is, just like you said, Vince, to be ahead of the game on the litigation front. At the Election Transparency Initiative, we've been working to try to get the laws changed underlying it. We've been very involved in getting those Zuckerbucks laws in place, meaning to ban Zuckerbucks, now in about half the states. We have worked toward more voter ID, more transparency and benefits, and cleaner voting methods. So when things like Maricopa County crop up where, oh, gee, the printers don't work, well, maybe you should have pre-printed ballots and in sufficient numbers to actually handle the voting. And we put structures in place to do that. And in part, I'll give you a simple way this plays out. Oh, we don't have paper. Well, then how about we don't mail a ballot to everyone on the voter rolls unless and until they ask for one? And Arizona was doing that. They were literally mailing to everyone on the voter rolls, and everyone on the voter rolls isn't even alive, much less an actual legal voter. So making people come in and vote using ID or having to identify themselves, like Virginia, for example, if you want a mail-in ballot, you have to provide the last four of your social security number.
Yeah.
That's a form of voter ID. And that cuts down the use of paper and the burdens on election officials and makes it more secure.
Right, and more trustworthy.
Trustworthy.
And so, Ken Cuccinelli, one of the big problems so many of us had with the last election was how long pivotal states took to count votes. So obviously, a state like Florida, we used to consider a swing state. It seems pretty solidly Republican these days. But regardless, they can count and they can get it done in a minute. It's done. We know by midnight how Florida has voted. What about Pennsylvania? What about Arizona? Are we ever going to get to a place where these states will actually count the votes and get us an answer by election night?
So every state decides how they're going to count. Florida is the gold standard. I mean, they pre-process all of their early votes. They don't count them until Election Day, but they pre-process them. So all they have left to do is run the tally. And so an hour after the midterm ended, bang, 6 million votes went up on the board in Florida. And neither side had questions or doubts about the accuracy of those counts. That was true in 2020 in Florida as well. And so it can be done. States like Virginia count ballots after they arrive. And in 2020, they were counting any ballot that arrived. That's not true. They were counting ballots that didn't have a postmark. And the statute says you can't do that. And we had to litigate that. And our side won. Kudos to PILF, the public interest law firm, and Christian Adams, who brought that lawsuit out in Northern Virginia, meaning like Winchester, really North Virginia. And they won and got rid of that, just like people sued in Wisconsin to get rid of ballot drop boxes, and they won. It didn't affect the 2020 election, but because these suits were brought out of the 2020 election, all the elections going forward in those states are cleaner now. That's a fact. So, but there isn't going to be a single standard coming from the right. The left wants a Washington takeover of elections.
Right.
But to your question, Vince, there's not going to be any one time and point in time where all the states do what we hope they'll do, because we have to win them one at a time.
You answered in part my next question. It's drop boxes. If there's one thing I hear from concerned Americans on a frequent basis about the integrity of election is that they don't like these drop boxes. They feel like it is a completely vulnerable to voter fraud way to conduct an election. And we had so many of them in 2020. You pointed out that they're now illegal in Wisconsin. That is, but what about other states? What about these other pivotal states?
So, states like Texas and Georgia and Florida have regulated their use, limited them dramatically so that they are done in a secure fashion. For instance, you got to have a video monitor all the time. You can only have one ballot dropped in, and many of them are just inside election offices. So it's really drop box and name only. I don't know, Dabino, I don't know, but it's brought within the security of the rest of the election. So that isn't done everywhere.
Right.
We still have problems with that. There's also ballot harvesting in Virginia. The Democrats put in place in the 2 years they had control lots of these left-wing provisions, including ballot harvesting. Well, this time, this election in 2023, our team is going to try to out ballot harvest them. My only Glenn Youngkin quote from WMAL, he was in an interview when he was running, "I don't like these rules, but these are the rules." Mm-hmm. And he was right. And a lot of effort is going into making that actually happen. So we've got to, you want to get rid of early voting? I tell people, beat the left at early voting. They'll happily join you to get rid of early voting. They have no principles. This is all about power to them, and that's it.
You mentioned a moment ago that all of this is state by state, and there's really not a federal solution to this in federal control. But there are some federal efforts to try and assist states. Congressman Dan Newhouse of Washington introduced a bill recently called the American Confidence in Elections Act, the ACE Act. He got the blessing of Speaker Kevin McCarthy. And it calls for a number of things, including giving state and county election officials access to the Social Security death list so that they can clean up their voter rolls. It makes it easier for states to use real ID to confirm the citizenship of their voters. It prohibits federal funds from going anywhere that allows non-citizens to vote, and it stops non-citizens from voting in Washington, D.C., which just instituted that. It supports military voters overseas, makes sure that their votes are counted on time, and protects free speech and donor privacy. That's the description of the bill. Is this a good idea that federal funds, to the extent that they're used at all, should be used in this way?
Yeah, to the extent they're used at all, it is appropriate to not fund systems that are registering non-citizens to vote on purpose. This whole act, the ACE Act, Brian Steele, the committee chair of House Admin, has been leading this whole effort. And it doesn't mandate that states do things. It offers them opportunities, which is respectful of federalism, quite contrary to how the left is trying to do things in election bills in Washington. Mm-hmm. So like you phrased it, this offers states the opportunity to improve their systems. And, there's some no-brainer items in here, like why we need to pass legislation to have voter rolls cleaned, including the Social Security death list. I mean, that should have been going on automatically already, but it's not. And right. So this legislation is important. It does bring more, frankly, cleanliness to the voter rolls, and dirty voter rolls hide fraud and create confusion. And the confusion goes back to those litigation fights you and I were talking about at the outset. The left wants to leverage its litigation advantage with muddy, messy systems. They do. And so they try to keep systems from getting cleaned up. And they often succeed in that, unfortunately. And again, it's to try and leverage their litigation advantage. At least they perceive themselves to have a litigation advantage.
Right.
So
and they're left with, and they leave the rest of us with the impression is that the sloppier that the election's conducted, the more likely it is that a Democrat will win.
Yes, it does suggest that, yes. And look, there have been messy elections where they've done this. The Norm Coleman, Al Franken election. You had a Soros Secretary of State. It was they were fighting over which ballots count, which ballots don't. The Soros Secretary of State reinterpreted a law while they were going through the third round of litigation. So their litigators, aided by a Soros Secretary of State, brought them over the top, and that senator made the difference in the existence of Obamacare. So yes. This stuff has real long-term implications.
Yeah, it does. All right. Hey, as always, Ken Cuccinelli, thank you very much for your attention to this. A lot of Americans concerned about it, and you're in the trenches fighting to fix all of it up. Thank you very much, Ken. Yeah, what is the deal with that story? LeBron James has a son who's a basketball player, but they call him Bronny James. He's a freshman at USC, and he suffered cardiac arrest at a workout late yesterday for USC. And that's it. So 18 years old. And I looked it up earlier. I was like, what is the incidence of this? How frequently do young people experience cardiac arrest? You think of cardiac arrest, you think of an old timer, right? They're normally cardiac arrest. You don't usually think of an 18-year-old. It is considered exceedingly rare, very rare for a young person to experience cardiac arrest. But it does seem like with much more frequency, you see all these headlines of young people experiencing this. Cardiac arrest. Now, luckily, Bronny James is in stable condition, according to the LA Times. He was in the intensive care unit. And probably thank God for his status and being around, people who could be attentive to his needs very quickly, because they say with cardiac arrest, like 90% of people perish when they experience a cardiac arrest. There's a small percentage of people who recover. He's in stable condition today. That's great. And his family released a statement sending thanks and appreciation to the USC medical and athletic staff for attending to him and rescuing him. But there is the question, how did this happen? How did a guy who is in peak physical fitness, 18-year-old male, who's playing for one of the top colleges in the country, whose father is one of the richest people on the planet, who's the star athlete, LeBron James, how does this guy suffer a cardiac arrest? What happened to him? What happened to him? And Elon Musk asked the unforgivable question on this subject today. He tweeted the following out this morning, and the media is going crazy. We cannot ascribe everything to the vaccine, said Elon Musk, but by the same token, we cannot ascribe nothing. Myocarditis is a known side effect, Musk said. The only question is whether it is rare or common. Now, that's true. Myocarditis, it's not a secret. Your swollen heart could be the product of the jab. That's not even up for dispute. And yet, the aggressive silence on that very topic today, and people going after Elon Musk for spreading conspiracy theories. We would just like to see our young 18-year-old athletes not have cardiac arrest. That's the position of the Vince Coglianese Show. 429. Good afternoon. You have 435 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Manny Diaz is here at 5 o'clock. He's the Commissioner of Education for the Sunshine State, the state of Florida. He'll react to all of the vicious lies and attacks coming out of the Biden White House against the state of Florida, who are just trying to actually teach American history to the kids in the schools down there. And you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. We'll be so grateful for your contributions today. We've got a lot of news today on the Biden family and the ways in which they've been enriched and protected by various entities within our federal government, your taxpayer dollars, part of an extensive protection racket for the Bidens. And brand new information today on what's going on inside of David Weiss's office. That comes to us from our next guest, Sarah Bedford. She's a political and investigative reporter for the Washington Examiner, a pretty damn good one, too. Sarah, great to have you with us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
David Weiss, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Delaware, has been conducting this investigation nominally into Hunter Biden and his business activities for some time. What is the new information today that you can share with us?
Well, my reporting from today is about a very close personal friend of the Biden family, a very close political aide to both Joe Biden and his late son, Beau Biden. His name is Alexander Mackler, and after he spent years working in service of the Biden family, and according to Hunter Biden's emails, as a close personal friend of Hunter as well, he spent a few years working in David Weiss's office, the U.S. Attorney office there in Delaware, including for at least the first 5 or 6 months of the Hunter Biden investigation and potentially longer. So I think this just adds to the list of questions that Weiss really needs to answer to clear up, is whether this person who very clearly had these extensive ties to the Bidens was asked to recuse himself. Did he play a role in setting this investigation off on a trajectory of slow walking and obstruction? These things aren't really clear. This relationship hasn't really been explored by House Republicans.
Why wouldn't Weiss's office or the Department of Justice call Sarah Bedford, and just clear this up immediately? Nope, he didn't have any influence. He was recused. Why haven't we heard anything like that?
That could be said of a lot of questions surrounding the Hunter Biden investigation and what Weiss's office has done. I mean, if these allegations of slow walking and obstruction aren't true, it seems like the Justice Department would have a pretty strong interest in clearing this up as quickly as possible. But they have not been forthcoming about any of the questions that have been raised. They've not made any of the people who've been named by whistleblowers available for testimony to Congress, and in fact are now past the second deadline that House Republicans have given them to make those officials available for transcribed interviews. So, and every piece of evidence that has been presented by former agents of the FBI that have been investigated, by the laptop emails, by the FD 1023 form, all of it corroborates this narrative that the Justice Department blocked a legitimate investigation.
Yeah, so with in the United States Senate, there were two Democrats, Tom Carper and Chris Coons, both Delaware senators, who recommended David Weiss for the job as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Delaware. And they're very close to Joe Biden, former Delaware senator himself. So Biden's family fingerprints are quite obviously all over this office of David Weiss. So it beggars belief that anybody could look at this and go, okay, this guy doesn't have any conflicts of interest and this will be fine, and whatever he turns up will be believable. I mean, even just the appearance of a conflict of interest is normally grounds for recusal, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, setting aside the idea that even if David Weiss had wanted to walk the straight and narrow on this and be aggressive as he would in any other case in investigating the Bidens, because that's what whistleblowers have testified to, that the Justice Department blocked his ability to do that. Setting that aside, he still has his own conflicts of interest. He's worked closely in the past with Kathy Jennings, the Delaware Attorney General, who, is also close to the Bidens, who said in her endorsement of Joe Biden immediately upon his entry into the presidential race in 2019 that she'd known the Biden family most of her whole life. She is the one who hired Mackler, this close Biden associate, out of the U.S. Attorney's office into the Delaware AG's office. And so he does have his own ties to the sort of Delaware political establishment, including having worked in that U.S. Attorney's office as an AUSA under Democratic presidents. So he is no Republican champion. And right. I think the Biden administration's ability to continue saying, well, he was appointed by Trump, has sort of completely fallen apart as a defense of his credibility at this point.
I noticed in your reporting, Mackler has worked extensively with the Bidens. As press secretary to the senator, Joe Biden, legal counsel to the vice president, Joe Biden. He was campaign manager for Beau Biden's Delaware Attorney General campaign. He's all over Hunter Biden's emails as a friend, calling him a brother, according to your reporting today. And he was on the Biden-Harris transition team in 2020. So basically, he took a break from working with and for the Bidens to work in the U.S. Attorney's office in Delaware during a really pivotal time.
Right, a pivotal time that also included the gun incident that is part of the lenient plea deal that Hunter Biden will go to court to have probably ratified tomorrow. He was working in the U.S. Attorney's office when prosecutors decided at that time not to move forward with any sort of consequences for the fact that he illegally purchased a firearm and then, his girlfriend dumped it in a trash can infamously in Delaware. That is another question that needs to be raised of the U.S. Attorney's Office. Was Mackler, this person with all these ties to the Biden family, allowed to get involved in prosecutorial decisions about the gun incident or these tax crimes that, again, he overlapped in that office for the first pivotal few months of that investigation?
It's a huge deal. But as I understand it, the Biden administration is silent on this. That includes the U.S. Attorney's Office, the White House, the Justice Department. You have not heard anything from them.
That's correct. I mean, House Republicans with the power of subpoena are also even struggling to get answers. So, it's perhaps unsurprising that they're not rushing to answer the questions of a conservative media outlet. But the Delaware Attorney General's office is also not being forthcoming. It's silence all around from the Justice Department. And it honestly just appears that the Biden administration and Biden's allies just don't have a good strategy yet for dealing with this. They're sort of playing a shell game with words with Biden's statements, but overall, there's no coherent strategy to refuting these allegations.
Right, and part of the kind of that semantic game that we're seeing is being played by people like David Weiss, the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, because they are at this moment credibly accused of slow walking and obstructing an investigation into the Bidens by these IRS whistleblowers who have not only testified behind closed doors, but now in public last week, saying that the Justice Department, including from David Weiss's office, is not allowing indictments and prosecutions of the Bidens to go forward, and that Joe Biden was extensively protected by the very assistant U.S. attorneys who were working in David Weiss's office.
Right. I mean, credibly accused by a lot more than just these IRS whistleblowers. You have FBI whistleblowers as well. You have former FBI agents who have left the Bureau since this investigation who have also corroborated elements of the way that the Justice Department has stalled this. You have former business partners who've been burned by the Bidens, including Devin Archer, who's set to testify before the House next week, who are corroborating this and saying that, they provided testimony to this sort of influence peddling to a grand jury, and that grand jury did nothing with it. So there are so many documents and witnesses that are corroborating this narrative at this point, and the Justice Department has barely bothered to even knock down all of this evidence.
Yeah, and that Assistant U.S. Attorney Leslie Wolf, who got mentioned a bunch by the IRS whistleblowers, who, again, works in David Weiss's office, she was the one who apparently kept telling everybody not to look into Joe, not to dig into the big guy, and was involved apparently in some tip-offs to Hunter Biden world ahead of some investigative activities. We are expecting some testimony from her, correct, before Congress at some point.
Well, she has been requested to come and testify by House Republicans, but it's not clear that the Justice Department is going to make her available. They might try to argue that David Weiss should be a sufficient witness because he was in charge of that office. She's one of, I believe, 11 witnesses that the House Republicans have now asked twice to be made available for transcribed interviews. But yeah, her testimony would be key because she's, right in the middle of all of the accusations. And I should note that, she does have at least some level of professional relationship with Alex Mackler, this close Biden aide, because they've prosecuted major cases together. So again, there's a lot that looks really bad here, and she's a voice that could help clear this up if it's just a misunderstanding. Yeah. No, there's a lot to dig into here that's totally legitimate and totally scary.
In the meantime, Sarah Bedford, thank you very much for your excellent reporting today. Really appreciate your time as always.
Thanks for having me.
That's Sarah Bedford from the Washington Examiner on, again, this important news that the Bidens had a guy. They had a guy who worked for them before he worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware, and he worked for them after he worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware. And you think he was a disinterested party on all subject matters related to the Bidens? Come on. You called Hunter Biden his brother, and he was working there at the U.S. Attorney's Office for at least 5 months of the investigation into the Biden family, the prosecution, the non-prosecution of the Biden family. And you also heard Sarah Bedford mention a moment ago that tomorrow the judge in the case is going to basically hear in the Hunter Biden plea arrangement, is going to hear the case and make a decision. The judge is going to weigh this. And the judge does have the option of throwing this thing out. This U.S. Judge Mary Ellen Noreika she's presiding over the hearing on this plea deal set to take place tomorrow. Remember that it involves 2 misdemeanors for failure to pay taxes on time, which were eventually paid by Hunter Biden's sugar brother, Kevin Morris. And then it also includes essentially an erasure of any felony whatsoever for lying on a gun background check form. You see, gun laws are not enforced when it involves Hunter Biden. If it involves a Democrat, they go by the wayside. And tomorrow, the judge does have the option to throw this thing out. I did see that over in the Washington Post, Hugh Hewitt is a contributing columnist there. He's saying the judge should blow the whistle on this plea deal and throw the thing out. It's a rarity, but a judge does have that option, and she should take it. Yes, she should, because this is a scam. This is a total scam. Who can get away with not paying millions of dollars in taxes? Who can get away with lying on a gun background check form and then bragging in a book, writing in detail in a book about your drug use, and not bragging. He wrote it as, these are his struggles, but he wrote explicitly. He wrote that he was on these drugs at the time. Yeah, it lines up perfectly. The whole reason there's a legal problem here is because here he is admitting to his drug use and then lying on the gun background check form. And then his girlfriend throws the gun out in the dumpster. And do you remember? We still don't have a lot of answers to that saga. Remember, the Secret Service was apparently involved in trying to deal with all of this. Why was the Secret Service involved? Joe Biden wasn't even vice president of the United States at the time. Hunter Biden wasn't entitled to Secret Service protection. What is going on? Also, have you seen the story about, speaking of the Secret Service, have you seen the story thanks to our friend Tom Fitton and Judicial Watch? Apparently, the Bidens can't control their dogs because they're terrible dog owners, and these German Shepherds they keep bringing in to live with the family, I guess, get no training whatsoever. Do the Bidens not attentive at all to their dogs? I guarantee you they're not, by the way. They don't look after these dogs at all. They don't care for them. They don't train them. They don't spend time with them. Instead, they expect the help to do it. Well, the staff will take care of it. So the dogs are biting everybody. Yeah, we have new reporting on that. The media is obsessed with it today. They asked more questions about the dog biting than they did about Hunter Biden, apparently, in the White House press briefing. But you should know that these dogs, which are not cared for by the Biden family, are lashing out and biting everyone at the White House. Joe Biden's nearly 2-year-old German Shepherd, Commander, has bit at least 7 people in a 4-month period after the former first dog, Major, was ousted from the White House, booted, the New York Post reports, over similar aggressive behavior, according to internal Secret Service communications reviewed by the Post. Okay, so remember when we knew it was Major, the dog Major, the German Shepherd, biting various Secret Service agents? Well, maybe it's a Major problem. Commander's not like that. Commander's different. No. Okay, so if both dogs end up being biters, to the point that you have Secret Service members being hospitalized with their wounds, maybe it's the owners. Maybe it's the Bidens. Ever think of that? The documents were all released by way of a Freedom of Information Act suit by Judicial Watch, the great people at Judicial Watch getting a hold of all these documents about all of these incidents, these biting incidents involving Commander, as people are transiting through various doors at the White House and elsewhere. Secret Service agents are there, of course, to protect the president and the first family, and they themselves need protection from the dogs, which are constantly biting them, sometimes breaking skin. In the most serious documented incident involving Commander, the White House Physician's Office on November 3rd referred a bitten Secret Service uniform officer to a local hospital for treatment after the dog clamped down on their arm and thigh, according to emails released under this FOIA to Judicial Watch. Records show Commander broke the skin of a different Secret Service member's hand and arms weeks later after the president unleashed him outside the White House following a family movie night. Good they're having movie nights. And the following month, Commander bit the back of a security technician at Biden's Wilmington, Delaware home. The press briefing today, Corinne answering some questions on the dog.
It seems that Commander Biden has a bit of a biting problem.
Okay, first of all, the press laughing about this. They think it's the funniest thing. I can't even believe I have to ask about this. But what's the deal with the dogs?
It seems that Commander Biden has a bit of a biting problem. Can you give us the latest and also any plans for him to perhaps make
be euthanized? Are you going to put him down?
Move, go stay with some family and friends as Major Biden, the previous dog, did?
So, as you all know, the White House complex can be unique and very stressful.
So that we all every so often bite someone Coringe implies. Like, what? What is that explanation?
It is something I'm sure you all can understand, and it is, as I just said, it is unique and it is stressful for all of us. So you can imagine what it's like for a family pet and family pets more broadly.
We all bare our teeth from time to time, she says. We all sniff at other people and animals. I mean, the president does it. Don't you see him? Uh-huh. You know, if it's not Coke, it's canines. The White House just keeps all these secrets from us. And now we find out that the dogs have been biting and wounding taxpayer-funded officials, and we all giggle about it amongst each other. What a great time. What a great time. This family is unbelievable. It's 4:58.